All right. What's up, Dennis?
Oh, nothing much.
Yeah, so I want to welcome everybody to the Kovu cast. This is like the first time I'm recording since the name change, but I want to talk about hero worship. And Dennis, I've had a bunch of conversations about this Kanye West thing, and hearing different takes from my friend Linnell Brian has um has been interesting on in terms of Kanye West co-signing Candace Owens and Candace Owens is a neoconservative woman who is known to criticize the black community for being victims, playing the race card, and not getting past the past. And Kanye West was like, "I like the way she thinks," followed by endorsements of Trump, and showing off his sign MAGA hat and saying, me and Trump have dragon energy. That's my brother. And then you've had people in Kanye's inner circle. Well, I don't know if Chance the Rapper and John are like inner circle, but close friends that have tried to talk to him, and like John Legend tried to say, like you don't want this to be a part of your legacy. You shouldn't align yourself with Trump. And Kanye West said, you're using that as a tactic of fear to manipulate my free thought. And so it's a lot. There it's like every day it's Kanye tweeting something even more inflammatory or something like that. And what's the I guess what's the ramifications of him doing this when he has so many people that look at him as a hero? Because growing up, I did a lot of Kanye West defending, a lot of it, but this Candace Owens thing is a it's just a different beast. And I also want to say that Romfest said 3 years ago, was it 3 years ago? It was around the time when Yeezus came out that like he had to leave Kanye while they were working on the Yeezus album because he wasn't spiritually and mentally right. And what's also interesting is Kanye West did a freestyle that said, and in the freestyle he said, hopped off the Amistad and made I'm a God. I'm a God is a record on Yeezus. And in this case, it can be interpreted that the slave ship he's talking about is, you know, black consciousness, whereas usually the slave mentality is attributed to being ignorant, not knowing about your history, not being enlightened. But in this case, it can be interpreted as what you call enlightenment is slave mentality, and it's limiting your potential. And so he said he hopped off the Amistad, which is the slave ship, and made I'm a God. And that was during the Yeezus time. So I would say that this isn't nothing really new. It's just now, Kanye really is laying it all out right now. But I just want to put it out there that Romfest did call this behavior out years ago, and people tried to paint him as a hater or a clout chaser or somebody that was, jealous of Kanye, which I didn't get that energy from him at the time. But what do you think of all this? There's a lot of people that look at Kanye West as a hero, and him, taking a hard right, pun intended. What do you think the ramifications of this is?
Well, for the most part, it's going to probably result in a bit of debate and fissuring. So we need to realize that with any community, there's a range of opinions. And the prevailing opinion would definitely not go with someone like Candace Owens.
Yeah,
If Candace was the one saying it alone, for the most part, you might get one or two people calling her out, and then it'd be maybe a week cycle on the internet, if that at all, and then it would be gone.
mm,
Kanye provides a certain amount of authority behind him. He has a lot of people behind him. And when he speaks, there's a greater ability for people who might be similar to him to feel more confident to speak. So
got you.
we know that when it comes to elections, uh, the African American community usually doesn't vote for people like Donald Trump.
Facts.
But there were a number of them that did. I
Right.
think it's somewhere between maybe 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 that did so. So you have a significant number of people that do exist out there that will come out now if they weren't out already, because now they have someone who can't easily be dismissed, especially not as any of the various name calling tactics that usually get put out there. Kanye is certainly not doing this so that he can look better in front of people outside of the community. You get the very real feeling that he doesn't care about that. And that sense of genuineness ultimately can come back to harm people. Because if it was just some random guy on the internet, this wouldn't matter.
Right.
The number of people who would come out of the woodwork, or perhaps were neutral, because voting participation rates or political aspirations or people who really care about this isn't uniformly there. So you're going to find a lot of people who would just overlook that. They wouldn't care about Donald Trump. They wouldn't care about Kanye. Or if they would care about Kanye, they certainly wouldn't care about Kanye's politics.
Hmm.
And this kind of situation allows for a sense of debate and a sense of a failure of unity. And I think that might be why there's such a strong reaction against this, and why people might say that he perhaps should be looking to maintain a greater amount of silence on his opinions, because when he speaks, others follow. I imagine that for the minority of people that agree with Candace Owens and for Kanye, and with Kanye, and are perhaps either active or closet Trump supporters, this was probably the best thing that happened to them all year, particularly if they're from a colored community.
Mm.
As in, here they have someone that they might look up to, or they might have at least enjoyed his music, coming out and being controversial and supporting them, or at the very least, supporting this kind of mentality.
Well, one thing that I find interesting also is that somebody like Mark Dice, who's always accused Kanye West of being a devil worshiper or having gay sex, which is like crazy shit, having gay sex as rituals to sell records. He is now saying Kanye West to the rescue. Or you just got all these conservatives that once painted Kanye as some sort of demonic person, and he says this one little thing, and the narrative switches like immediately. It's wild. But off of that, speaking of voting, to segue, I did a poll on Twitter that said, "So Kanye West, what do you think of his Trump endorsement?" 34% of people said he thinks it's. They think 34% of people thinks that he's a genius, and that's trolling. 9% of people said he's a sunken place god. Sunken place is a reference to Get Out, the coonery or whatever. And then you got 28% of people said I separate the man from the music, and 29% said he's no longer a hero, uh, which is interesting. Just getting into hero worship, because growing up, Wayne was my hero, and people within the industry, because my father didn't necessarily believe in my career path. But as I've gotten older, I'll be 25 next month, May 6th. Um, I look at it almost now as like you're setting yourself up for disappointment, you know. Um, and I think a lot of people are devastated by this. I really do. But one thing I will say that's also interesting is Eminem last year stood up for Black people and advocated for being conscious of what's really going on. And Eminem drew the line in the sand, and he said, "If you're a Trump supporter, don't even buy my shit. Just leave my shit alone. Hate me or whatever, because I feel like I'm standing on what's right." And Eminem had a fair amount of Trump supporters and conservative people that loved him. And then you got Kanye West now. It's kind of like the opposite. He's pissing off a lot of his core fans by saying something that is so vehemently antithetical of what they stand on, what they generally stand on. So, and you got to also remember Kanye West used to be considered conscious. That infamous clip of him saying George Bush doesn't care about Black people, and just talking about how the system sets us up to fail, and just a bunch of things like that. and this is a 360. And yes, so some people look at it as a troll. Some people look at it as like, Kanye is going to be Kanye, and as long as the music's fire, I'll support it. And then some people are just saying he's not my hero anymore. What's your thoughts on hero worship in general? Do you think people set themselves up to be disappointed when they do that, or do you think some people are worth being praised as heroes, like let's say Martin Luther King or something?
Well, let's talk about Kanye first, and then we're going to go straight into hero worship because
Okay.
the way you put it is pretty much spot on. There's a direct relationship between ideation towards the man and the disappointment one feels when there's a betrayal of expectation.
Mm,
So, with regards towards Kanye, you set up that poll pretty well, but, well, pretty well to figure out something along these lines, anyways. But when it came to someone like Mark Dice, I don't really care about Mark Dice at all, but I've watched enough of his videos to have something of a basic understanding of him. I have the very strong opinion that if he was very anti Kanye in the past, this move is entirely political. There's nothing genuine behind it. This
mm,
is just one way to score points in the grand conflict that he's fighting. This has nothing to do with Kanye. It has everything to do with someone who's perceived to be an individual in their camp rebelling. And
mm,
that's the only thing he cares about. I'm sure that if he goes into there and he starts listening to his music and starts quoting it, at least the first few times he does it will be entirely cynical. I don't know. Maybe he might actually like his music. It's hard not to find something of Kanye's that you don't like it, at least on some level.
yeah.
But at this point, I really doubt that there's any sense of genuineness there. For those who want Kanye to be trolling, I think that as part, I think that's partly due to individuals not wanting to have their figure fail them. I think that they really take solace in the idea that Kanye might be trolling, so to say, in the same way that many Trump supporters might think that Donald is playing some kind of 4D chess, or that
Mm,
he's far-sighted going all the way down the line. And while there might be some wiggle room there, depending on how one views his negotiation strategies, President Trump is not playing 4D chess. I think that's pretty much out there.
yeah.
Kanye has had a history of perhaps being pro-Trump. I mean, he was caught in a controversy a little while ago as well. I think a year or two back. So I don't think that he's trolling. But I think his fans might want him to troll, might want this to be a troll, because that way they can claim that it was all a joke if Kanye comes out in the next few weeks or months and says, yeah, I was all playing with you. And I think that they would really, really like that.
Mm,
And then there are those who were betrayed by Kanye, or at the very least betrayed by what they thought Kanye was. So they built up an icon, and then the icon disappointed them. To those people who can't try to rationalize that and say that it's a form of trolling, um, now the response is probably along the lines of, I trusted him. I looked up to him, and I was wrong to do so because of how strong a reaction they have against Donald Trump. I have a feeling that in the future, if it was a different Republican, it might not have been that strong. But there's a very powerful sentiment inside of the conscious community that Donald Trump is something unique. And for people who might have liked Kanye because he called out George W. Bush,
mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying whether or not that call out was accurate or if it was completely false, but for the people who started to look up to him because of that, this will come across like a slap in the face, and they won't know what to do. And so a couple of them might just go cold turkey and say that they're never going to listen to him again. But then there are those who maybe don't care as much about politics. Those people will very easily find a way to separate the politics of the person from the art. In fact, most people do this to some degree. It's only with people that they really dislike or that they really like that the politics and the man and the art all become one thing. As in, that's a
Mm,
very rare occurrence. But it happens. It happens with people of particular infamy and a particular fame. And that means even, I don't know, crayon drawings from when they're 5 can be sold for millions of dollars the nearest time anyone tries to hold an auction on precious relics of a certain hero or villain in history. And I think
yeah.
that might be coming up with it too. But with regards to those who say that they don't care enough or don't want the politics to infect the music, they're coming at it from a different angle. To them, they're like, maybe he's a Republican, maybe he's a closet Republican, or maybe he's just someone who likes Donald Trump. And you know what? I either don't agree with that, but I like his music anyways. I agree with that, so it doesn't really bother me, or I don't care. And there's a very real sense of apathy among some people, and they'll go along with it. And perhaps the very last option is I am of a particular mindset that we can divorce the man from the art almost always, and it's dumb to not like Kanye's music anymore when we know it's some of the greatest music because of this.
Mm.
And then there was one other option, I think, if my memory is serving. I wish I had this poll in front of me so I don't potentially make a fool out of myself. But this one was the option of Kanye not being a hero for them anymore. I'm not sure if that was its own separate option in the poll or if it's just something that popped up.
It's a separate option. So there's Genius Troll, there's Sunken Place, there's I Separate Man from Music, and No Longer a Hero. And 29% said No Longer a Hero. So it's the second most voted on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to comment on the sunken place because I think that that's something that I don't know enough about to comment on.
Gotcha.
But if if I wanted to make a random guess, that's probably more along the lines of the idea of perhaps being either a traitor or ignorant. And
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
like
feel confident enough to. I don't really feel confident enough to firmly put my hand on that.
yeah, no, I definitely understand that. It is like losing yourself almost, like losing yourself and kind of forgetting the core of who you are, your roots, yada yada yada. Just losing yourself, I guess. But anyway, so the no longer hero part you said.
Yes. So that is perhaps the best segue to get into the hero worshiping part.
Hmm.
A lot of people feel the need to make others into heroes. We see this everywhere. Any very successful person will have people who follow behind them, calling them a hero. So, some of the perhaps easiest ones to pick up on are most people would consider emergency first responders heroes, as in EMTs, firemen, the people who go into burning buildings to save people. A lot of people
Facts.
consider them heroes.
Facts.
Law enforcement and the army, even though that is some more political baggage there now,
Facts.
most people would still say that they are probably heroes. When you get into really famous artists or really powerful philanthropists or very successful businessmen, people will call them heroes. So Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, plenty of people consider them heroes. And then a number of people who maybe start um, major foundations to take care of people and provide some kind of service. Some people consider them heroes. Most presidents and major politicians, once they retire, start a foundation to take care of some kind of civil society need. And those people are sometimes regarded as heroes.
Mm.
The Clintons were considered heroes by many people for a while, but things have been changing in the past few years, in large part because of politics, but also because of a certain demystification that surrounds people and a real strong sense of disillusionment with politics in general. You're going to find some people who think that the Obamas are heroes, and the Obama Foundation is doing a lot of good work now. There's also the Bush Foundation, which has been doing some work as well. And in a way, it's something that retired presidents do. They start a nonprofit and they open up a library, and
Yeah.
then they just make speeches for the rest of their lives. But then you have people who go out and provide good works that are just maybe ordinary people. Those are called everyday heroes. But those are a different category. In fact, the category of service can just be pushed to the side. Doctors, firemen, you can push them to the side.
Yeah.
The people who are just on the street and they are the ones who run towards an explosion rather than running away, that's a temperamental thing. That is a horizontal sense of hero.
Mm.
The best from among us. And you can probably put them and treat them differently from the hero worship that comes from authority and talent. And that's where we get the Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, the Clintons, the Bushes, the Obamas. That's where you find those people. And I'm pretty sure people thought Mark Zuckerberg was a hero for a while until relatively recently, which we have controversy for.
Yeah.
And I'm sure plenty of people still do. There are people who probably still consider Facebook to be one of the most useful social networking platforms created in human history. And there will still be people who look up to Mark Zuckerberg. Pretty much clear across the board. But there are those who buy into, or rather, buy out of that illusion when they're confronted with a certain set of facts. And I think that's what happened relatively recently with Cambridge Analytica. While this is a little bit of a turn from Kanye supporting Candace Owens and Donald Trump, in a way it goes along a pretty similar line of thinking. You have a sense of optimism, you have a sense of respect, because people who consider Kanye their hero don't say that because they think that he is good at music. Heroes are not just talent, it's a comment on character. People probably bought into the idea of Kanye. And the idea of Kanye was what they carried inside of them. And it's something they might have shared with friends online when they were talking about it after a new album came out, new
Mm-hmm.
song.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in the lyrics, it was in the background noise. And for people who were still in schools, it was probably in every hallway. This kind of constant creation and discussion around an idea. And the man becomes the embodiment of an idea. And when that goes along a fixed path, there are really only two outcomes. The first is that person doesn't do any wrong, and he stays true to himself. And a lot of those people die young. But there are a few people who are able to do that basically from the moment of fame till when they go in the grave. But then there are also those people who end up disappointing. And that is most heroes. Most heroes that come about from a sense of authority, or a sense of respect, or a sense of success. Those kind of heroes typically do not have a very long-term shelf life.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's always a sense of betrayal. There's always a sense that something went wrong. And I was very conscious when I invoked George W. Bush earlier. I'm sure there are plenty of people listening to this right now that might have groaned or rolled their eyes when I brought up Bush.
Probably.
Yeah. But a lot of that probably has to do with a real sense of memory being off. George W. Bush, in the days after 9/11, days and months after 9/11, had an approval rating in the 90s, briefly, or at the very least the very high 80s. That's something that never happens with a politician. He was widely respected. He had absolute support. He went from someone of dubious legitimacy because of the election results in Florida and someone that people made fun of because of his accent to a very well respected and powerful world leader with a great deal of international goodwill. Even the invasion of Iraq didn't end that, it just diminished it a little bit. Instead of high 80s, it became 60s and 70s. It was still good. People were still confident, and people still thought that he might have been one of the most effective leaders in the United States in the past 50 years. That changed when the Iraq War began to drag on, when there were failures in the administration of Iraq, when when Osama bin Laden remained uncaptured, when there were problems with Katrina, when there were various comments coming out of the woodwork, when things looked like they were falling apart. That is when George W. Bush fell as an icon, and you saw a great amount of disillusionment. And while he was reelected, it was clear in the second term he was fading in popularity. He wanted to end his various campaigns. It came out more and more often that enhanced interrogation techniques didn't work and had no place, that there were structural problems with the intelligence communities that helped create this idea of a politicized campaign to go into Iraq. There was a failure of trust, and a good deal of goodwill that the presidency and American politics had built up fell. And that was a fallen hero. And now most people look at that and they would doubt that it ever was a hero. Instead, it was just a villain. And that goes to the idea of a betrayal of expectations. There were probably a lot of people who felt like they couldn't, in good consciousness, support certain policy decisions after that, or support certain politicians after that. And there's still a great deal of trauma that many people feel, not just overseas, but also at home, particularly in areas like New Orleans. So that happened, and we can't walk away from that. We have significantly less forms of failures like Cambridge Analytica. And Kanye coming out in support of Donald Trump and Candace Owens certainly isn't of any similar level to that. But it speaks towards the idea of failure and betrayals of expectation. People trusted Facebook as an optimistic organization. When they provided certain guarantees, you took them at their word. And even when things started looking like things were falling apart, you still wanted to trust them. Now no one trusts them. Or at the very least, very few of them do. With George W. Bush, people trusted the United States, trusted in the mission of counterterrorism and going after al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Now there are people who so badly dislike the man that they believe that he planned 9/11 himself. That is the degree of 180. Granted, those people are not many. It's still enough to cause concern.
Gotcha.
So, the failure of an idol, either due to purposeful action or structural changes beyond their control, or just sheer stupidity, happens all the time. And people constantly create them too. No one comes out and says, I am a hero, support me.
Yeah.
Certainly, major leaders in various industries never did it. Many of them will actually be very modest and say that I definitely am not. It's a cliche amongst politicians to say, I'm not a hero. The hero are the men and women who serve. It's a cliche amongst those who come home to say that the real heroes are those who we left behind, or those that come back without heartbeats and that are inside of wooden boxes.
Mm.
Very common cliches. And they are cliches for a reason, because they have truth to them. And they are instant deflections. And because people hear that enough, they become numb to it. They become numb to this expectation that heroes will say they are not heroes. And so people continue to idolize them, or at the very least, provide them more respect than they deserve. It's strange in a way, but people
Yeah.
naturally do that. I'm sure I'm sure when you were growing up, there were people successful in your life, people who did things better than you, or who were more easygoing amongst other people, who had more success than you, and you perhaps idolized them a little bit, or at the very least, you respected them more than you probably should have.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, this is something common to people. It's part of, in a sense, growing up, but it's something that continues well beyond growing up. It's part of the human desire to find something to respect as better than themselves. And there are
Mm.
plenty of people that will go out and continually do that. A lot of people are mad with Kanye, not because Kanye as an individual did something they don't like. I'm sure there are plenty of people who would say that anyways, but that's not really true, or at the very least, it's certainly a minority.
Yeah.
Most people think that because they created an idea and they associated that idea with a person. There was a strong amount of hero ideation, hero worship. And then it got betrayed in their eyes. And it was that betrayal that set everything back to square one for them, or at the very least, certainly knocked him down a peg in their eyes. And then there are those that might have actually been the opposite, might have thought that Kanye was a fantastic artist, but couldn't support him because of politics. And now that Kanye said that thing now that he is supporting Candace and Donald Trump, think that, okay, now he is a hero. As in, it can do in reverse. The same way that some people started developing ideas about Kanye after going out and criticizing George W. Bush might now go out and support him for, at this point, supporting Donald Trump. It's
Huh.
a it's a shift. People like to follow certain actions. I can tell you something that probably might make some of your audience mad, or at the very least make them think a little bit. There are those that you don't pay any attention to right now, or there are those that you might like at a certain to a certain point, but you don't really care. If
Mm.
they read a news article that they did something that they agree with politically, at that point, if it's sufficient enough, they'll talk and support it. So there are
Yeah.
plenty of people who, in times of discord, would look at a different political party or a different kind of organization, and they'd look for defectors, people that you could look to if they were leaving your side and call traitors, or people on the other side that people could point to and say, here, right is on our side, even their side is leaving them. That happens all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you that there are plenty of people, probably to an extent that no one really wants to admit, that follow certain people on Twitter or social media purely because they did something that they were not expected to do, that they agreed with.
Mm. Yeah. And the thing about that is, here's something that's perverse to me is when white people congratulate the transition from Democrat or liberal to conservative Republican, and they say something like, "Oh, you left a Democratic plantation. You left. You freed yourself. You're a freed slave." Bro, I wish a white person would say that. Well, because my mother, rest in peace, she was a lifelong Democrat or liberal. And I'd be damned if somebody said, "Oh, well, she lived her life as a slave." That shit is stupid. The same stupid shit of saying liberalism is a disease. And I'm not a Democrat or like a Republican or anything like that. I guess people will say I lean like more liberal. But my point is, there's a lot of hardworking people in my family that are conscious, and I look at them as educators. There are people that understand the past and believe in educating the youth, so they can go further in life and accomplish many great things. It isn't like a thing of like, oh well, the system is set dead set against us, so we can't accomplish anything. So let's just be welfare junkies. My grandmother, my mother, my uncle William, they didn't teach that shit. They taught hardworking. Um, they taught us to be hard workers and free thinkers. And that's another thing, ascribing free thinking to a ideology like, oh, if you're a black conservative, then you're a free thinker. I've seen a lot of that, and that shit is irritating as well. You can't, there's free thinkers on all sides. It isn't as black and white. It's I think more nuance should be added into that conversation of what a free thinker truly is. Don't get me wrong, there is such thing as mob mentality, but that's on like both sides. But yeah, I don't really like that terminology of like, oh, you escaped the plantation. My mother was not a fucking slave. Don't talk to me like that. That's just yeah. But
Yeah. Every hero needs a villain. That's where terms and phrases like that come out.
yeah,
And sometimes they come out hideously. It's not enough to say that I'm on the right side. Your side is wrong. When people talk about the slave mentality, they are perhaps invoking any one of a dozen different things when they do that. But it's
yeah,
always a way to demean those who do not change, who do not defect, who do not say, I am on your side, I am not with them anymore. As in,
yeah,
that's just how it goes. I'm sure plenty of people. So, what would be the reverse of that? The reverse of keeping the slave mentality, so to speak. Maybe it's the idea that someone's an Uncle Tom or a coon or something along those lines,
yeah. That's a word
when
that
it's
gets
the
used.
opposite direction.
Yeah. That's a word that gets used a bit too liberally or whatever if you don't subscribe to um, certain thoughts or whatever. But yeah, like I said, it's a reverse. Like Kanye West talks about, deprogramming and getting past the past. And so, in this sense, the slave ship Amistad could be full of quote unquote conscious black people, and he looks at getting off that slave ship as freeing yourself. He posted this one video, or actually was multiple videos on his Twitter of Scott Adams, I guess a political thinker guy, um, saying that Kanye West, in 7 words, is freeing people like freeing millions of people in transit and getting them into the golden age. Like he was really praising Kanye, and it just kind of made me laugh a bit because Kanye is often thought of as very egocentric and self-centered. And this video, basically, the video he posted was praising him of of freeing people's minds, freeing people from ignorance or whatever, deprogramming, as Kanye would say. But I just don't think people that are on the opposite side of Kanye in certain debates are programmed or blue pill junkies. Because people love to use the red pill,
Oh,
blue
yeah. The
pill
reason
thing.
why I brought that up wasn't to say that it was true, it was to say that it was false.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
people like to create hero narratives,
yeah,
and hero narratives require there's a villain, or at the very least a challenge to overcome. The blue pill, red pill dynamic that some people like to bring up is an example of that.
yeah,
There are very few people in this world that ever really embody what other people claim they do. So The idea of liberalism as a mental disorder that sometimes comes up amongst certain right wing circles.
Yeah.
There are very few people that would ever fall into that.
Mm.
People bring up the slave mentality. There are very few people who would ever come close to that. When people talk about Uncle Tom's, there are very few people who would ever be like that. There's always nuance, there's always gray. People are not categories, they were
Mm.
not designed for them.
That's a quotable.
Categories, yeah, categories are made so that people are able to simplify the world. Their very creation, their very speaking, their very invocation is designed to make a complex world less complex. And once you do that, you're no longer dealing with people, you're dealing with ideas and factions and politics.
Mm.
And I'm not really sure how to escape that because that's just natural human behavior. And it fits right into hero worship as well. Because once you have factions, once you have categories, it's the leader of those categories that become your heroes.
So you're
Who's a
saying there's always
leader?
going to be a hierarchy.
Well, there are always hierarchies. Those things exist everywhere. Inescapable consequences of nature. God help us on that bit. But yeah,
Okay.
think of any category that you can make up. Name one of the most successful people in that category. Name one of the leaders of that category. And you have someone that other people will consider a hero. As in, it's that simple to a certain extent. I wish I put that much more simply earlier on in this conversation. I like how talking is apparently thinking. It's only clearer now that we've already gone down this road a bit. But yeah, I would stand pretty firmly by that decision. Whenever we're dealing with some kind of authority through competence, prestige, or leadership ability, or really anything that's hierarchical, you're dealing with someone who's king of a hill. And that hill is a category. And that category is, to some degree, not nearly as real as other people like to think. Everything,
Mm.
in a certain sense, is thought. It's an artificially constructed thing. And it's very hard to escape that. What is, I don't know, what is music? What is hip hop? What is rap? What is mumble rap?
Mm.
You can create a category as broad or as narrow as you want. Music as a category. What is music? I don't really know.
Yeah.
Certainly broad,
Very.
certainly very messy once you get around the edges. And it
Very.
contains a hell of a lot of things. And then you narrow it down. What is hip hop? I'm sure there are plenty of artists that are on the edges of hip hop, but I'm
Mm.
sure the most popular artists inside of hip hop, those people are considered leaders, either leaders in their field by competence or people who are actually able to mentor or lead other artists simply by their actions.
That's funny you say that because, and this could be like the last um, topic or whatever, but the idea of hero worship in terms of like, I don't know, like I had Wayne growing up, I had E40, Jay Z, or whatever, but a lot of these mumble rappers, it's funny because in the music, they shit on the lifestyle of many of their fans. So like, oh, you're a broke boy, or I could take your bitch, or I could, you look at all this jewelry on my neck and my wrists. I'm that nigga. I'm that guy. And they may post the jewelry and the riches and the money on Instagram and call it motivation, but in the songs, they piss on the life. I look at it as pissing on the lifestyle of the people that support them in a sense, and I think that actually adds to like I don't know, like Instagram or whatever. When you see these pictures of flashy lifestyle and saying, "Yeah, this is the life," and if you ain't got it like me, then if you ain't got this money, then your life isn't worth anything. I think that can add to like depression. And you definitely see. I've definitely heard women talk about that. That's why there was that one popular story where a woman said, "I got a who quit modeling on Instagram because she said she felt like she was living a fake life and looking plastic because she used a lot of Photoshop to cover up her flaws, yada yada yada. Well, I think the same thing goes with males and looking at mumble rappers as heroes. Like, oh man, I want to be just like him. I want to be just like him, but not everybody can become rich. Not everybody can get that jewelry. Not everybody can get their dream girl or whatever. That's why people like J. Cole and Kendrick Lamar are looked at as heroes because they they tell you to celebrate who you are, no matter who you are or where you come from, no matter what your background is. You'll never ever hear them say um, you're nothing because you have nothing. They talk about the importance of spirituality and feeling comfortable with yourself. I mean, Kendrick Lamar literally made a song called "I Love Myself," and a lot of people didn't necessarily like it because it was just such a different sound from what he was known to do on his last album. But it was about loving yourself and not killing yourself, not beating yourself up. And I think that message is very very important. Because I my cousin shot himself in the head or whatever, and nobody saw that coming. But and I talked to his mom, and he said, part of that, she said, part of that could be the fact that he felt like he wasn't going anywhere with his life. A lot of stresses, you know. He did music. Music wasn't really working out for him. I think he was having a hard time getting a job or whatever. And yeah, and I think looking at mumble rappers on Instagram, that can really discourage people from finding happiness within their lives. And then it goes to the point of clout chasing, and clout chasing is a whole nother topic. But doing things for attention, uh, so you can be recognized, because me and you both know, Dennis, humans have a need to be accepted socially. Um, and I think that's why Naruto as an anime resonated with so many people. Again, that's a random thing, but I'm just saying it all goes back to acceptance and wanting to be cool, wanting to be loved. And I think looking up to mumble rappers could be dangerous and be depressing. I feel like it really can be. What's your thought process on that? Like, this is going
Oh, I
past just
get
the
what you're
concept of hero
saying.
worship and looking up to somebody that actively, I guess, shits on your lifestyle via the music.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot to think about there.
Yeah, and we don't
So,
have to cover all that now or whatever. I just thought that was just an interesting thing
no,
that.
no, it's okay. It's okay. I'm just thinking about that for a second.
Okay.
Earlier, I said that every hero needs a villain, and sometimes that villain is the place where they left.
Mm.
So, all of those people who now stand at the top of success,
Mm.
instead of, I don't know, hating their challenges, they hate the people they could have been.
Mm.
Or at the very least, they hate who they might have been or at one time were. So, there are plenty of people out there that, after becoming a certain level of wealthy or a certain level of success or a certain level of talent, they tend to look down on those that they've left behind, on those that aren't as good as them.
Yeah.
And that might be into any number of things. So I don't want to speak too definitively on that bit, but
Right. Right.
there is a very real sense that people might develop a sense of animosity for where they came from because that was the enemy. And then there's a sense of animosity towards people that haven't left where they came from. Because if they felt like they worked hard to get where they are, those that didn't rise up, they must not have worked that hard at all.
Which we know is simply not true.
We do,
Hmm.
but there's plenty of people who might think that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one element of that. When it comes to people buying out of life, potentially giving up on everything. If you're inside of a society of hero worship, realizing that you'll never actually get to become a hero in the way that you define a hero as, realizing that you'll never be as successful as you want to be, that you'll never have the life that you thought you'd always have, that can break people. In
Yeah.
fact, that has broken a lot of people.
Mm.
Suicide is a very common way for people to go, particularly amongst young men, especially if they're isolated socially. Social isolation doesn't really fit into hero worship, or if it does, it's a very thin relationship.
Yeah.
But for people who are socially isolated, they have difficulty coming into a sense of their own. People like to think of themselves as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true, as in that's really true, as in that's unbelievably true. But your sense of individuality is informed by the people around you. Who
Mm.
are you, DK? Your answer to that question, something like 75% of that is in relationship to those around you. Who you speak to, who you talk to, who your familiar relationships are, who your friends are, who your mentors are, who your mentees are. All of those
Mm.
things build up into you. I am I am me, I am myself are only things that have meaning with relationship to other things around you. And when you're socially cut off, part of your personality, part of your sense of well being is severed. A lot of people like to think that hell is other people, but the people who invoke that the most are those who are typically rather lonely, those who might have given up on having relationships with other people.
Mm.
And that's difficult. The more isolated you are, the more vulnerable you are. The more you lack self esteem, the more uncertain you are, the less likely you are to try to make friends. The more difficult it is for you to talk to people, especially face to face. You'll find a lot of people shifting their social connections online because it's easier to do things online than it is to do things in real life. And then there are those who doing things online might even not be able to reach out there. And then they might just give up on reaching up on other people. And at that point, if you don't have a purpose, if you don't have people that you're trying to help or trying to do for yourself, if you don't have something that you want, something that you can achieve, or something that you can do, and if you don't have any religious problems with killing yourself, then at a certain point, people will consider it. A great deal of people have considered committing suicide.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with a sense of loss. So there's real loss, there's imagined loss, there's loss of innocence. All of those things might be triggers, but they're all triggers for one thing or another relationship towards a sense of profound meaninglessness and loss. If being around other people is what gives you meaning, then it becomes your group. That's what drives you forward. It's your relationships, it's your life. If you don't have relationships, if you don't have a dream, if you don't have a job, if you don't have goals, what is your life? Is it
Right.
being in a room? Is it watching videos online? That's not life. At a certain point, people are going to wake up and it's going to be 30, or they're going to be 35. Sometimes it's even 40. And they're going to think, what happened? What happened to my life? And that can crush people. And it can
Damn.
crush people much earlier than that. It can be 25. It can be all of my friends are married, going to college, or joining some kind of job or military service, and I'm alone.
Mm.
Or I've been betrayed too many times. I thought I had friends, and they left me.
Thank the traders.
Yeah, just to keep just to keep the continuity here going.
Yeah.
And that can ruin people. There are a lot of good men and good women, a lot of kids, a lot of young adults, a lot of people our age and older that just end up dead. And I would wager maybe a third of that comes down to loss or social isolation or some kind of failure of expectation, some kind of idea that they had a dream that they can never actually achieve. And that reality is painful. There are some people who keep a delusion alive just because it's the only thing keeping them going until they find something else to keep them going. And you'll run into plenty of people like that in your life. I don't really have anything wise or important to say about that. Most of this everyone already knows.
Yeah.
So there's that bit. As
Yeah.
for the idea of, just to switch this back to something a little less heavy,
Hmm.
hero worship as destructive action. Sure, that's definitely real. A lot of people have bad role models. That's actually what that is. Destructive hero worship is having bad role models.
Mm.
So if you see emulations of certain behaviors that are either disrespectful to themselves, to their communities, to women, to their parents, to anything really, that's something that could become destructive. As in the idea that status is the ultimate arbiter of things. Having things makes you more important. That's having a mutated, warped sense of reality. So
Mm.
long as you're comfortable, so long as you have a decent life, what does having more do for you? And there's actually been some studies on this. While money increases happiness,
Yeah. Every after the 200,000 or 250,000 point, is that what you're about to bring up?
yeah, I wasn't going to bring up an exact number, but I'm glad I'm not the only one who's heard about this. So
Okay.
again, I'm saying things that everyone already knows. Congratulations, people. You're coming to the podcast where a guy is telling you things you already know. I hope you take that to the bank and you run with it. But yeah, after a certain point, money doesn't have strong returns. Now, for people who are really low on the ladder, people who are near rock bottom, money is extremely important, and we can't really belittle that at all. As
Right.
in, if you're dealing with people, oh, okay. If you're dealing with people who are in a certain situation whereby they lack support, where they lack the ability to provide food on the table, you're dealing with a very different world. As in, if you have a single parent trying to raise a kid or trying to raise multiple children, there's no way to get around that. None whatsoever.
Yo, hello.
Hi. You seem to
That was,
go away there for a second.
well, it went away by itself, and I was like, oh, well, that's the Kovu cat. I was like doing the outro because it said you stopped talking, and I thought there were technical difficulties. So I was telling people, since we talked about Kanye, if they wanted, they could check out my song with Glenn, somebody who's working with Kanye. Just released that like I
Well,
don't
we
know.
can do that now. I mean, it still says we're live.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's have our own little conclusion to this bit. When
Okay.
you went away, I just started to continue
Yeah.
talking about people who are in a situation where they are still desperate, where they still need things.
Hmm.
And I think those are the most vulnerable to this kind of, what's the best term for it? I would want to say toxic, but that's become political in a way that is difficult for me to describe. Instead, I'll just say that it's not good. It's not good for them. It's not good for anyone else. And it's that sense of vulnerability that actually really does this. People being vulnerable. Because, like I said, like we were talking about earlier, the closer you are to being comfortable, the less this will resonate with you. But if you don't have that sense of comfort, you're going to be much more hungry about that kind of life, about that kind of struggle,
Yeah.
about that kind of dream. And for some people, that can be pretty good. But depending on what kind of role model you're looking towards, what kind of things you're doing to get there. It can be very destructive. So, yeah, that's my concluding thoughts on that bit. Hopefully, this has been useful to some degree or another. And
Yep.
what do you want to say to close us out?
Oh, I just have a record with this guy named Glenn, Glenn Reynolds, but he also goes by Glensky, somebody that's worked with Kanye West, Kendrick Lamar, um, and I'll probably have it in the description or somewhere in the video during the edit. I'll put it probably in the video, but yeah, this has been a great conversation, Dennis. I'm glad we could get this done, and I look forward to hearing you guys' feedback on this episode and future episodes. And I'm gonna be a lot more consistent now with the Kovu cast. Many of you may know about the fact that I had a podcast called Thank the Traders, but now I want to do something a little bit different. And I just hope you guys enjoy what I got cooking up. So you guys have a great weekend, and well, I guess this is coming out Sunday. So yeah, whatever. Uh, that's it. Cast is over. Peace.
Take care, everyone.